Hey guys, Gang here, and today we're gonna... Oh no, did someone shoot the PNG? Darn, poor guy, may he rest in peace. But as it stands, this channel is constantly growing, and it seemed like a good idea to have a mascot who wasn't completely blocking a large portion of the screen. Anyway, hi, I hope y'all like the new look. All of this was cooked up by Chimera, the backbone of this channel pretty much. And for everyone who's been referring to me as Gang, well, now you don't have to. Gang is the name of the channel, and Lexi Waybright is the name of its mascot. I did consider going by my real name, but, I'm not ready for that yet. Cam made a lot of really good sprites that I can't wait to show you. So, let's get into the video so I can, demonstrate, shall we? Total Drama was released in 2007, and in a couple months, we'll be celebrating its 17th birthday. And I'd be willing to bet that if you showed the original trilogy to anyone who is unfamiliar with the show, they'd immediately be able to tell you what era it came from. This is unmistakably a mid to late 2000s show. You can tell that by the characters, how they speak, the technology they use, and the character designs. Just compare the designs of the reboot cast to the original 22, and you'll see what I mean. The reboot characters dress like people who you would see today, while the OG 22 are just wearing pretty normal casual wear. That's not to say that the original art style is bad, I think it's just clear that over time, the art style of the series and the direction of the characters' design have evolved quite a bit since the original series. So some original characters wouldn't fit as well. I mean, some of them would fit much better than others, so like Gwen, Courtney, Heather, Lindsay probably could work as long as their important characteristics were updated for 2023, and they'd probably need new redesigns in the process. Believe me, goth girl fashion has changed a lot since 2007. Now, why am I bringing all this up, you might be asking? Well, here's the thing. Because Total Drama has existed for so long, pretty much everything that could be discussed has been discussed. Ad nauseum. Many of the prolific TD YouTubers who blew up because of their Total Drama related content have stopped or slowed down prior to the reboot's announcement, since everything had already been said. It was common knowledge that Lindsay's eliminations were bullshit, that Heather was a queen, that Trent's derailment in action was awful, that World Tour was the best season, and that All Stars was real bad. These were just commonly accepted by a lot of people, and it's hard to disagree. But one key difference between that content and the stuff that's being made now is that a lot of time has passed. We are living in a completely new generation, and the original Total Drama trilogy just isn't modern anymore. There are plenty of dated elements of the shows, and that's not a problem. It's a fun little time capsule, and obviously, I think a lot of it holds up. I wouldn't be making content on it if that was the case. Gwen, Owen, Heather, Lindsay, Jeff, okay, I don't know about Lashana actually. I don't think I'm qualified to make that verdict. But as time has gone on, one character who was far and away one of the series' most popular when it first released isn't anymore. And that character is Duncan. The final four of Island, plus Chris and Courtney, were pretty much the poster children of the series for a while. You got Owen as the funny one, Heather as the mean villain, Courtney was the less villainous one, but still mean, Gwen was pretty much the de facto protagonist, Chris was the charismatic host, and Duncan, well, Duncan was the cool guy. This was the guy that 2000s kids were meant to look at and go, wow, that guy is so awesome, because punk dudes were popular at the time. I mean, they still are in certain circles, but back then, a character like Duncan was in, and his popularity among fans reflected that. If you asked Total Drama fans back then what they thought about Duncan, I imagine most of what they would have had to say would have been very positive. But if you were to ask fans now, let's say, on your community post, they are less kind. Now, while there were many different opinions expressed in that post, the general consensus seems to be as follows. Duncan was at his best in Island, well liked by most people and one of the highlights of the season. In action, he wasn't quite as good, but still had a positive reputation among fans. World Tour is where he started to get a little iffy, and by All Stars, his fan base had mostly dried up. And I can understand this sentiment, these were my thoughts for a while. But, as time has gone on, as I've grown as a person and developed a new understanding of things, I've come to the conclusion that Duncan has had numerous problems since Island. Duncan was presented in Island as a delinquent with a bad attitude who was just there to ruffle some feathers, be cool, and not pay any mind to what people thought of him. But from Action onward, the writers just kept trying to sand the edge off of Duncan for the purposes of character development, while still trying to portray him as the coolest guy on the block, despite the fact that by the late game of action, he was spending most of his screen time getting humiliated by Courtney. And back when the show first aired, this probably wasn't a problem. Duncan was the coolest kid on the block who didn't take shit from no one, got 2 girls wrapped around his finger, stood up to Chef, and did all this other cool shit. Now, Duncan is a bully, a sexist, and quite frankly, a terrible boyfriend. And thus, 3.5 pages into this script, I can finally state the thesis of this video. Many of Duncan's core character traits that were seen as cool and excusable back then are very much frowned upon today. Which is a lengthier way of saying, no! Duncan has not aged well! And to demonstrate this to you, let me draw some parallels with the traits I just mentioned. Duncan's casual sexism? Well, he's just a guy, and guys don't understand girls. Duncan being a terrible boyfriend to Courtney? Well, she's a type A crazy, and he had to get out of there. And while Duncan's bullying of characters like Harold isn't necessarily a bad trait to have on its own, he is a delinquent, I started raising a few eyebrows once I considered how positively he was being portrayed by the show. Now, if Duncan was a villain, all of these traits would make him an unlikable character, but, you know, he'd be a villain, so it'd be fine, it wouldn't matter. But the way that Duncan is portrayed in the series, he is most certainly meant to be an anti-hero, a character that lacks heroic attributes but is fundamentally a protagonist and someone that we're meant to root for. We're supposed to root for him to get together with Courtney and Island, and when the two start squaring off in subsequent seasons, he is the one presented in a good light while Courtney is villainized. Over the course of each season, both of these two have done a lot wrong in their relationship. So it would make sense for the villain of the relationship, or the one we're meant to root against, to be the person who has done more wrong. The narrative pushes Courtney for this, but it is definitely Duncan. Take Island, for example, the season that most people agree is Duncan's best. I like Duncan in Island, but early on, I have to admit, Duncan's flirting with Courtney is really creepy. In the first half of the season especially, this is a notable problem. Courtney is not at all receptive to Duncan's flirting, and the fact that he's so persistent really doesn't set my mind at ease. Like, imagine if instead of Duncan, it was Ezekiel who was doing all of this. I don't think the fans would have received that very well. But back then, this was considered normal for developing couples in media. If someone followed Duncan's lead in real life, though, it would be considered harassment. And I'm not trying to say this to be like, ooh, Duncan is problematic and you shouldn't like him. What I am saying is that we, as an older audience, are more inclined to recognize this behavior as wrong and creepy than audiences in 2007. And I know this because that's a big reason why people don't like Chase. Duncan and Chema obviously have many differences, but they share a few similarities in the ways that they develop. The guy starts out being flirty and obnoxious, which the girl is unreceptive to, but later on they do get together when the girl comes around and they get together. I'm not saying that Duncan is as bad as Chema. I think later on in the season especially, Duncan really starts to blossom. What I am saying is that Duncan and Chase really didn't have that different of an approach when they first started. Chase flirts with Emma in the same way that Duncan flirts with Courtney, and no one gave him any slack for that, as they shouldn't. This is a common issue that media used to have, and it gave men the false impression that if they were persistent, cool, and suave, women would just flock to them, even if they seemed cold at first. They called it playing hard to get back then. Now, we call it a sign of disinterest. But largely, I can look past this in Season 1. Basics Training does a good job building their dynamic, and honestly, if their whole relationship was like this from the beginning of Island, I don't think I'd be talking about this right now. So Island Duncan, yeah, he does have several flaws that really don't hold up today, but his positives outweigh the negatives, and I still do like him. That's not the issue. The real problems start in action. Alright Duncan, I'm gonna need you to repeat after me. Courtney, I'm not cool with all these charts and rules. You know I'm not gonna follow them, and you know that's not my style. If you keep insisting on this, then we're done. Comment section, if you have it within you to theorize, please explain to me why the fuck Duncan did not say anything to that effect. Action tries to convince us that Duncan is the victim of Type A Courtney's unrealistic expectations and possibly abusive behavior. But that's not really what this is, and Duncan does nothing to help himself out. Why is Duncan going along with all of this? Because he really likes Courtney? I'm pretty sure he only liked her when she was willing to get crazy on his level. Why wouldn't he just immediately bail once he saw all the rules she had for him? The answer for this is that the plot needed to happen, so this is what we got. And on its own, I wouldn't say that this is the worst plotline or that it's really bad writing. No, I just don't enjoy it, and I wish they did something different. I am aware that Fresh TV basically forced the writers to break these two up, but like, really? This is what you're going with? So it makes sense in the real world for this relationship to be written this way, but in universe it really doesn't make sense for Duncan to put up with this. Why didn't he just talk to her, break up with her, or something along those lines? It's not like she was holding him hostage, he wasn't in any danger. So why didn't he do anything about it if she was draining him so much? I'm pretty sure there was a reason in-universe that I can't quite remember, but the main reason why it's written like this is so he can get revenge on her in Top Dog and vote her out. And that much I can say Courtney deserves, as she was, like, not the nicest person in Action. I think we know she kinda had that coming. So begrudgingly, I give Action Duncan a pass. World Tour is a different story. World Tour Duncan is underratedly terrible. He is up there with Action Trent and All-Stars Mike as one of the biggest derailments of the series. He peaked in episode 1 where he sang, "This sucks," and it was all downhill from there. I have several reasons why I hate Duncan in this season, so let me lay them all out for you here. Firstly, Duncan from pretty much the moment he was eliminated was treated as more important than he actually was. He was constantly being referenced by Gwen and Courtney, by the Aftermath people, by Chris, and while that did build to his eventual return, it also set a precedent that when Duncan returned, it was gonna be big. And his return definitely did not warrant all of that. Outside of the love triangle stuff and strategizing with Alejandro for like an episode, the dude does nothing. He's certainly an important character, that much is undeniable, but did he need to be one? I asked my community tab what they thought of Duncan's return, and the best argument I saw for him is that his presence in the season allowed Heather and Alejandro to fly under the radar, and thus gave us our best final two of the show. And I'm inclined to agree that this is indeed a good thing. I just think that the way he did this is not very fun to watch. The love triangle plot is completely and utterly fucking miserable. And while all three of these characters are at least reprehensible to some degree, Duncan is by far the worst because he allowed this shit to happen in the first place. Say what you will about Gwen, but at least she had the decency to tell Trent that things weren't working out when he started getting on her nerves. Now, you may be inclined to make the argument that
It wasn't her boyfriend at the time!
you could argue something like this. Counterpoint. Courtney still thinks that he's her boyfriend, or at least romantically involved still in some way, and Duncan never clarifies otherwise. No, you don't do that. And at this point, I really have to disagree with some of the commenters in my community tab, because they seem to equate Courtney's actions in Action to being worse than Duncan's in World Tour, and it just really isn't that comparable. Courtney does not treat Duncan well in Action, but she's not malicious towards him. Duncan in World Tour is malicious towards Courtney. I firmly believe that the relationship problems in both seasons could have been solved or at least mitigated if Duncan just made his grievances known to Courtney. And given the character who Duncan is supposed to be, this should not at all be a problem for him. And I'm not trying to say that Duncan is 100% in the wrong and Courtney is an innocent angel. She is an awful person in Action, and she's really not that great in World Tour post-breakup either. But Duncan just kind of let all that happen to him. In Action, I felt a little bad. In World Tour, he 100% deserved all of it. Okay, I just got done editing this part of the script, and I feel like I kinda need to explain what I mean here. So a lot of people in my community tab are under the impression that Courtney is an abusive girlfriend towards Duncan, mainly in Action, but also in World Tour. And I would like to say that I am not saying that Duncan deserves to be abused. No one does. Total Drama is a silly cartoon at the end of the day, and I doubt that anyone at Fresh TV or Tom McGillis or anyone writing on the show would actually try to portray an abusive relationship in that light, especially since most of it was done for comedy. What I am saying is that Duncan deserved to get shit from Courtney because he wasn't clear about how he felt, and in World Tour that led to him actually cheating on her, which I think we can all agree is not cool. So I just wanted to make myself clear on that front. Alright. Back to the video. Gwen did too. Honestly, it doesn't even matter whether or not Duncan and Courtney were dating at the time. Hooking up with your friend's ex like that is, not a very cool thing to do.
You are definitely on the right team.
Am I seriously meant to be rooting for these two because Courtney was mean to them? In the latter half of the season, Courtney is bawling she's so distraught. And what's Duncan doing? Actively trying to get under her skin and make her feel even worse. And I don't think Courtney's done anything up to this point that warrants that kind of behavior. This is one partner having too high of expectations for the other, while this is just awful. This is exciting TV drama. This is way too real. Courtney deserved to have Duncan break up with her. She did not deserve to be cheated on. No one does. But Duncan's the cool guy who secretly has a heart of gold. Courtney was just ruining his vibe, so she's the bad guy. She's so uptight and demanding and mean. Not like Duncan though. He's chill, and he's mean in a good way. It's honestly comical how All Stars thought it was appropriate for Duncan to be put on the heroes team. Because he's not one, in the slightest. In fact, I'd say he's a worse person than Joe, Lightning, or Alejandro. Why do the same actions that make Duncan cool make Courtney a bitch? Well, that's because he was the 2000s golden boy. He's framed as this hyper-competent, super likable guy that we're meant to root for, and he's not that. He's crude, he's inconsiderate, he's a terrible partner, he has no respect for others, he's selfish, he's an asshole, he's needlessly violent, he's sexist, he's probably transphobic, and if he were a real person, he'd probably have some problematic scandals under his belt by now. That's why I think that his reputation has waned significantly over the years, because we as general audiences are much less willing to let traits like this slide nowadays. Casual sexism in the 2000s was just guys being guys. Now it's scummy as hell, as it always should have been. And all the issues I've addressed in this video aren't necessarily the faults of the creators. Executive changes interfered a lot with Total Drama and specifically with many things involving Duncan. But that doesn't mean I have to like Duncan or what they did with him. With that being said, is Duncan a poorly written character? Generally, I would say no. The only season where he's outright horrendous is All Stars. And even then, I can take some solace in the fact that he gets absolutely shit on this season, and it is hilarious. And while there are many flaws regarding his character, I think I have less problems with him specifically and more how the narrative frames him. So poorly written? Sometimes, but generally speaking, I think he's pretty solid. But is he a likable character? I would say, not anymore. And obviously, that's subjective. You might like Duncan, and that's fine. I know that he's a nostalgic character for a lot of people. I grew up watching Total Drama, and Duncan was a big part of why I enjoyed the series. But as I've grown up even more, I think it's only fair to address the writing problems that I never noticed as a kid. So, in conclusion, don't cheat on your partners, don't be a bigot, and don't bully people for no reason. Okay? Okay, good video. See you next time.